Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very special chat we have with our Writers Guild members. Today, we will be diving into the wonderful world of documentaries. Firstly, before we begin, the Australian Writers Guild would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. We would also like to pay our respects to all the traditional owners across this country and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. A little housekeeping before we begin. The chat window, or the Q&A window will be open, so please do put any of your questions in there, and we'll try and answer them throughout this talk, or we will keep them all the way to the end once we're all done chatting. So please put them in there. So also a huge thanks to the staff of the AWG for making these talks possible. We couldn't do this without them and without their hard work and dedication. So thank you very much to Shannon for putting this together for us too. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our two wonderful guests from Burraloo, Western Australia, the co-writers, co-directors, and co-editors and producers of the documentary Girl Like You, Samantha Marlowe and Frances Elliott. Their debut feature is Girl Like You, which is live now on Netflix, and it was previously on iView. Is it still on iView, guys? Yeah. They're currently in production of their next feature documentary, Renee Gracie From Bathurst to OnlyFans, which will be a Stan original. Samantha and Frances are also the recipients of last year's AWGIE's major prize, and we're very pleased to have them with us today. Welcome, guys.
Hello. How you doing?
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Let's start with you both. How did you get started in this industry? Was writing something you always wanted to do? Was editing the pathway in for you? We'll start with you, Samantha.
Yeah, I had a bit of an interesting start because I originally thought that I wanted to do journalism. That was kind of my starting point. And so I went to university for journalism, and I also studied film because I really wasn't sure. I liked the idea of kind of delving into stories, but I guess the longer I got into my degree, I realized that I was more interested in like character pieces. And from there, it kind of turned into realizing that the documentary space was more something that I favoured. But I was also studying film. So I had a bit of a funny start because I was editing at university, started working straight away at Channel 9 Perth as a news editor. And that is where I met Frances. And that was kind of the beginning of us instantly collaborating on our first documentary, Girl Like You. And it really like snowballed from there.
And Frances, was editing always your key into the industry?
No, so I always wanted to be a writer. Ever since I was like 4 years old, I wanted to be a writer. You know how you used to have those things where you write, what do you want to be when you grow up? I always wrote writer because my dad was a writer, and I used to, he used to hand type his scripts on the typewriters, and I used to take his old scripts and write novels on the back of them. Even when I was a really little kid, I wrote my first novel when I was about 10 years old. It was like 6 pages long and had about like more spaces than words. But I always wanted to be a writer. And my dad, who is a writer and director for film and television, was like, it's really hard to just be a writer. Like maybe you want to study film and television and kind of get a broader knowledge and see if you like it. So I went and studied film and television, just absolutely loved it. And, fell in love with editing while I was there. And similar to Sam, I got a job straight out of uni at Channel 9 News, and that's when me and Sam met each other. And ever since, editing has kind of been the way that I make my money in the industry, and have kind of been able to work in the industry while also writing on the side and doing my own projects and stuff like that.
So you're both working at Channel 9. Was it then that you decided to start on this documentary? What was the kind of the key kicker that made you go, this is the story we both want to tell?
Well, it was funny with Frances and I because like we met each other and we both realized that we wanted to make films. And then it kind of honed down into we want to make documentary. And then it was kind of this, what do we want to make a documentary about? We'd, sit together and we'd shoot ideas together, and we'd have, we'd think about what's interesting to us. And with Girl Like You, it kind of came up organically because Elle and I grew up in the same small town in Roleystone, which is, the hills of Perth. And I'd heard about her because she was a drummer in kind of an up-and-coming band, the Love Junkies, which feature in the film. And I'd heard that she was kind of at the beginning throes of, coming out with the idea that she was potentially transgender. And she'd done a couple of articles, and we were seeing it in bits and bobs online. And I remember just having the conversation with Frances, and we were just automatically like, this is a really interesting subject matter. There really isn't any kind of local content on anybody who's transgender, especially not in Australia. I think at the time it was just so, things were going off in America because Caitlyn Jenner had kind of come out, and that was the catalyst for a lot of, international content being made, but we hadn't seen anything done in Australia. So we just thought, let's go for it.
Yeah, and
sorry.
What was that?
Just the context, it's 2014 at this point. Is that right?
Yeah, me and Sam, I think we were 24 or something when we started this. We were just literally just babies, and we'd never made a documentary before, not even like a short one. And our close friend is Lauren, who is Elle's partner in the movie. And so we were all part of a kind of best friend group that Elle was a part of as well. And Lauren would kind of tell us about what she was going through with her then boyfriend, Lewis, who was going by the male name Lewis and going by male pronouns. She was then talking about, she thought potentially she could be transgender, and she told Lauren that, and that she might want to transition. And Lauren they were about 6 months into their relationship, and Lauren kind of had no one to really relate to or talk to about that, because she was talking to us, and like we had no context for like any of this. Like, how do you give advice to your friend when like it was quite a new sort of situation for Lauren to deal with. And what we found is there was no kind of content for Lauren to look to in order to sort of see her own experience reflected on screen. Like, I think a lot of us, we watch movies to kind of relate to our own lives, and like they teach us about how we should deal with situations, and, teaches us life lessons and all that sort of stuff. But for Lauren, and largely Elle as well, there was kind of no sort of love story that really reflected what they were going through. And me and Sam kind of saw that and were like, we should really make a documentary about this. And so we got a crew together, no funding, no nothing, and we just started shooting. And at the time we were 24, they were 25. And we kind of naively thought that Elle would start transitioning. She would transition in a year. We'd shoot the documentary in a year and then edit it, and it'd be out there in the world. But what we kind of didn't realize at the time, because we didn't know anything about it, is that a transition for someone in middle class Australia is a much, much slower process than for someone like Caitlyn Jenner, who can kind of go behind closed doors and transition overnight and come out as, fully transitioned. But for Elle, it wasn't like that. She didn't have any money. She was a musician. And so when we started shooting, it took her about 2 years to actually decide that she did want to go through the transition. So we had about 2 years of footage of her literally just juggling whether or not she wanted to transition or not. And then we kept shooting for another 4 years after that of her transition. And by the time we finished, which was about 6 years later, she still hadn't finished her transition. So it was a much longer process than what we thought it was going to be.
And at what point in that journey do you sort of realize we have a longer story to tell here?
So, I think for us, we did start shooting the documentary primarily as a transition narrative. We were just going to focus on Elle and her transition and document it all. But basically what we found as we were interviewing them both is that, you know, a lot of the questions that we had were actually for Lauren, Elle's partner, about how she was dealing with the transition, about how she, how it was affecting their relationship, you know, and as she started transitioning, how her sexuality was influenced by now dating a woman. And, you know, Lauren had to come out and do all these things that she never thought she'd do before because she categorized herself as straight. And so for us, we thought that that was so incredibly interesting, that the kind of couple dynamic. And, you know, it just got to the point where you know, we felt to do the story justice, we needed to do it as a long form story because there were so many complexities about how their relationship was functioning and how they were dealing with it that we felt like wasn't represented anywhere in the world. And so we really wanted to give it the time on screen that it deserves, so that there could be kind of like a transgender love story out in the world.
And I guess talk about that process, obviously from a writing sort of point of view. When did you start putting something down on the page, trying to figure out the narrative you were going to tell? Or did that happen much later?
I feel like we were constantly writing throughout as well, because Frances and I were on a mission, you know, from the moment we started filming, that we were trying to get money to, you know, funnel into this production. So we were constantly writing pitch documents, applications, treatments, just from the beginning. And I feel like, especially with the AWGIEs and the award, it felt really special to us because, you know, when Frances and I kind of submitted that script, it felt like it was such a huge part of, it was our baby, essentially, because we've been writing and rewriting these paragraphs for 6 years. And I feel like it didn't stop. And we wrote throughout until we eventually got funding, I think 5 years in, was it?
Yeah.
And then after that, we were writing afterwards. So it was a 6-year process of just writing. Writing, shooting.
Well, talk us through those initial kind of like written documents. I guess for people out there who are jumping into documentary, what was it like writing that treatment? What does that treatment sort of look like on the page, and how is it sort of presented to those funding bodies?
So it was, you know, it was a funny thing because every single funding round we go to had kind of a different skew on things. So you couldn't kind of just write one pitch document and then just give it to every funding body who came along. You basically had to rewrite it every single time a pitch document would come along. So basically what they usually ask for, and which was pretty stock standard, is you'd have a log line, a 1 paragraph of the story, a short treatment, which was maybe a 1 page, which details the story, and then a full treatment, which basically is the whole story that you're planning to tell from beginning to end, and how you're going to tell it. So you have to kind of give people an idea of what they're going to be seeing on screen while this is happening. So you can't just write it as if you write a novel. You have to give them an idea of what vision you have and what they're seeing on screen. So that's usually what, and then of course you have the director's vision statements, which come along with it, which also kind of give an idea of style and music and all those sort of extra things. But because each funding round was so different, we ended up, and because our story was forever evolving, every single time we did that, we would rewrite it completely. And at the time, it was very frustrating because it was so much time, but it was incredibly helpful for me and Sam to be putting it on paper, because what it would do for us is it would kind of reaffirm what we were trying to do and what our story was and what we needed to focus on. So, you know, in the beginning, we were just kind of shooting into the wind, like just shooting everything. But as we were writing these documents, we started to see, okay, this is the most interesting part of the story. We need to, you know, focus more on these two doing things out in public, or these two, you know, having talks together in the bedroom. And it would really hone in like the parts of the story that we wanted to tell, and it kind of informed the way we started shooting it as well. So like all of those pitch documents were so helpful throughout shooting, even though We wrote 20 of them, I think.
And just to add to that as well, once we could kind of, we had funding, and we knew that, you know, we could sit down and we could actually go into pre-production for this film that we'd already kind of 90% shot. Francis and I dedicated a really wealthy amount of time rewriting that treatment again and writing kind of a script for ourselves, you know, so that it was kind of, you know, we had exactly what we wanted to shoot in those remaining years that we had. So a lot of writing.
In looking at it being a story about transitioning as well, I'm taking it that probably the early sort of pitches, you're dead naming your central L, because we don't know that it will be L. We don't know it'll eventually kind of end up as a story with Lauren being a very sort of main character in there. Can you talk about, I guess, the transitional narrative and what you wanted to really get across? What wasn't being presented on our screens then? And what did you really hope this documentary would achieve?
So yeah, the way that we wanted to film the documentary and the way that we, you know, because we had 2 years where Elle was deciding whether to transition or not, we had to have discussions about, you know, were we going to use her dead name in the film? Were we going to use the pronouns that she was using at that time? And, you know, it was kind of as simple as talking to Elle about it and seeing how she felt. And she kind of said to us, no, like those years when I'm deciding to transition were fundamental to my transition, you know, like, so that she felt they needed to be on screen. And one thing that Elle kind of noticed about the transition stuff that she was watching online, because she would devour everything to try and get as much info as she could, you know, but she found, and we found as well, that there was kind of this narrative which, when you're, you know, in the trans community, there's this narrative where, you know, I knew that I was transgender from 2 years old, and the only thing that stopped me from transitioning was the medical system or the greater society. And so that was my fight, is overcoming that. And this day I turned 18, I transitioned. You know, that's kind of the stock standard trans story. But for Elle, it wasn't like that. And for a lot of trans people, it's not like that, because transition is a huge decision to make. And I think it's only human to have doubts about that. And so that was a big part of our story that we wanted to include, that we felt that wasn't seen anywhere else, that, you know, even though Elle juggled for so long about whether she would transition or not, that doesn't mean that she shouldn't transition. She still came to a really solid decision and has never regretted it a day since. But, you know, we kind of want there to be a little more light and shade to be allowed for trans people. You know, you're allowed to, like, not know what you want to do and be confused and backtrack and do all those things without feeling like you're making the wrong decision. And similarly with the love story that we were trying to tell, you know, we really wanted to turn this into, to showcase it as a love story, because I think for us, we didn't want the film to just be something that purely people, queer people would watch. We wanted it to be something that queer people would love, but also people who were unfamiliar with the lives of trans people would watch and really connect to. And I think the way that we wanted to do that is through the universal theme of love, because I think everyone can relate to love and heartbreak and the ups and downs of a relationship. So kind of putting into a love story context, I think what we hope is that the film humanizes Elle in a way that everyone can relate to. And so they come out of the film feeling connected to her in an innately human way. And the hope there is that it kind of reduces this idea of otherness to trans people.
So at which part, like, of the journey do you eventually start teaming up with Cody Greenwood, who's your producer from Rush Films? Like, where is the story at that point when you guys team up, and how did that pitch occur? What was that like? Was it on the page? Was it in person? Did you go in as a team to funding bodies? Talk us through that moment.
Well, we were only a couple of years in, and we're all super green still. Cody, you know, we knew of her through friends and that she was doing some amazing producing work. We're all kind of at that emerging filmmaker point in our careers where we were trying to, you know, get projects on our slates and meet people and network. So we got introduced to Cody. We went and had a coffee with her. She was immediately on board, and we just had an amazing relationship from the get-go. And the great thing about Cody is that, you know, similarly to us, where we were trying to juggle a feature film with no money and having a full-time job, Cody was kind of in the same boat, but she was always, you know, looking for ways for us to get this film made with money. So with Cody, I think, yeah, how many applications did you say, Frances? I think we did, you know, 20 applications, which was, I feel like, a really important process for Frances and I to go through as filmmakers too. And it's something I'm super proud of us for doing, because I feel like to get knocked back so many times for a project can be a really like demoralizing feeling. But I feel like if you really believe in a project and you've got an amazing team with you that believes in the project too, same with Cody, there's so many times where she could have jumped off the project, but, you know, between the three of us, we never stopped kind of believing in this story. So yeah, we worked with Cody a couple of years in, we brought her the project, and that was it. We've just worked on it ever since then.
And then talk us through that I guess the winning pitch or whatever kind of got you into that room, got you the actual funding that you needed. What was different at that point in your story that you previously might not have had over those 19 other iterations?
I think it was figuring out what the point of different was to our story to that than other stories like it. So, you know, we had a few points of difference. The major one being that it was kind of focusing on the couple and the partner's journey as well as the person who's transitioning. But I think what eventually got us funding is we got into the AIDC factory pitch, and we pitched to a panel of decision makers and you know, a audience of 800 people. And, you know, during that process at the AIDC pitch, they take you through like a pitch course. So you go in and you pitch it to kind of the other people who are pitching, and everyone gives notes, and you sort of hone your pitch enough to then change it and do it again to the decision makers. And I think at that point we had really nailed what our story was. And the most interesting parts of the story. So, you know, for a lot of times me and Sam kind of got a bit bogged down in the details when we were pitching to people because we had so much to say and so many things that we wanted to get out. But, you know, we got to this point where we figured out, okay, these are the most interesting dot points about this documentary. These are the things that everyone always asks a follow-up question about. And just sticking to those and being like, they'll get the biggest story eventually when it's made. I think that for us really helped us, just honing in on what was the most interesting thing about the project. And then from the AIDC pitch, we got ABC commissioning from that.
Okay, so you're both editors and you're both writers in this sense. Is writing editing to you guys? Do you pretty much write in a timeline first, or do you kind of like write on the page and then transfer it over? Sort of explain your process. I mean, I've worked with writing duos, and sometimes I'd write a scene, they'd rewrite a scene. Is it similar in the editing process for you, or is it start on the page and then move forward? Take us through kind of what it's like in the room.
Yeah, so for me and Sam, we, you know, as we said, we wrote all the way through, but once we got into, okay, it's official time to write this, the way that me and Sam did it is I came from a background of drama, writing for drama. And we, as I said, we'd never made a documentary before, never written a documentary before. So the only kind of framework I knew was drama. So we actually plotted our film out as if it were a drama. So we follow the 3-act structure, focusing on the hero's emotional journey, which is essentially, you have a flawed protagonist who comes into the story and goes through and experiences which changes them profoundly, and they come out at the end of the film with a kind of lesson and new life that they couldn't have achieved if not for that on-screen journey. So me and Sam mapped out our documentary by the hero's emotional journey and the 3-act structure. So we wrote it into a full script. At the time, it was actually a 6-part series because that's what we ended up getting funding for. So we wrote it into a feature film first, and then we split it up into 6 parts. And then we started the editing process. And, it's kind of, as you said, it's like you write it and then you get it on the timeline, and it's completely different, and you change everything and you go from there. But, having the writing process was really important to us because it kind of, it reinforced to us what the kind of focus of each scene was, what was the purpose of each scene. So we had a really good baseline. We weren't just like cutting into nothingness. We knew what the scene had to do. And obviously from there, everything changes and you re-edit and you throw the script in the bin. But we did start with a proper script.
So is that writing process taken from transcribed audio from the interviews, or is it sort of like, we had a conversation about this, so I want to include this, paraphrased moments, like, or is it literally verbatim, this time code, this, like, to talk us through how you guys write?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Francis and I, because, we weren't funded for so many years, what we would do is that we'd shoot and then we would sit down and manually transcribe every shoot day, which sounds so archaic now because there's so many programs that just do that for you. But at the time in 2014 till 2020, we were manually transcribing every thing that was shot. So for Francis and I, that ended up being really advantageous because we had photographic memories of everything that was said, the way it was said, the tone in the room when it was said, because we'd consumed it all and we'd transcribed it. So yeah, I mean, in terms of time codes, Francis and I in our scripts, we wouldn't necessarily sit down and say, this is the time code. But what we would do is we would have our master transcribe log open. We'd have an idea of a scene in our head, and then we would write that kind of scene into our script and then cross-check our transcribe and kind of pull from there. And we use that a lot in our writing process and in the edit as well, just kind of being like, wasn't there a moment 4 years ago when Elle said, I hate drumming, and we type that into our master log and find it, and so that ended up being, hugely important to the writing process.
Talk us through getting the funding. You were mentioning that you got it for a 6-by series, and previously you've got this 1 hour out, which is now on ABC iView and just dropped on Netflix last week. But there's also a longer version of this as well. There's 3 completely different edits. Was it always that intention, or talk us through the genesis of that?
Absolutely not. Our original intention was always for it to kind of be a standalone feature film. Francis and I always thought since the beginning that their story, Elle's transition, and then the love story needed to kind of be consumed in one sitting. And you sit in a seat, you watch it, you consume it, and you come away with how you feel about it. But that's not always the way that these things go. And the first funding we got was in kind of an online digital format, which was the 6x10, kind of intended for like an iView episodic, consumption. So yeah, that's what we did with our first round of funding, is that we sat there and we plotted out each episode so that each episode would kind of have a beginning, middle, and end. And that ended up working really nicely for our 1 hour as well. It ended up kind of being exactly what we wanted it to be. There were a few tweaks here and there, but I think doing the episodes ended up benefiting us in the long run. And then of course we've got our director's cut, which is the feature.
Yeah.
And the favorite child.
Yeah, so we had to do the 6x10 because we ABC originally commissioned it as a feature or a 1 hour. But then Screen West said that the only funding that they had available that we could go through was episodic. So we were like, at that point, we were 5 years deep. We were like, we will take whatever you've got. So we cut it into 6 parts. Each had like a theme that got raised and resolved, but told a larger story. And then at the end of that, we knew that we always wanted it to be a feature film. So we cut it into a feature film off our own backs. And then we delivered both versions to the ABC. They preferred the 1 hour version, the feature version, but they said, can you make it 57 minutes and then we'll do it standalone. So then we cut that feature length into a 1 hour. So the 6x10 has never seen the light of day, which is sad, but still fine because that's ultimately what we wanted. The 1 hour lives on ABC and now Netflix, and the feature version does the festival circuit.
So explain to, I guess, everyone watching today, what are they missing? Is it just sort of tonally? Is it just little extended pieces, or are there larger kind of scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor for one reason or another?
I would say that they're deleted scenes. Francis and I actually had a huge amount of difficulty cutting down our feature to our 57-minute. I remember us just sitting there and thinking this isn't possible because every single bit of content is perfect and it needs to make it. So it was incredibly difficult for us, but I would say there are a couple of extra scenes, but the larger story remains the same. And I definitely flip-flop in which one I prefer now. I think the feature will always be the favourite because you just do get a little bit more time and space within those scenes that we've got, but they both work.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same exact story cut down, but there's kind of like a few sort of off-roads that we don't take, mostly to do with kind of the minutiae of where she's at in her transition and particular struggle she's having. You know, we tried to sort of condense it and keep it to the love story essentially.
And I take it that feature documentary screenplay is what you then end up submitting to the Awards. Is this right?
Yes. Yeah.
So talk us through that process. Obviously, like as writers, we all look towards the AWGIEs as a kind of big end of year event. You guys have just now completed like your first feature doc after 6 years of like following subjects and becoming ingratiated in their lives, and now it's sort of out in the world. What's the process now like of like entering the AWGIEs, and what was that event like for you guys?
So yeah, the AWGIEs were always kind of a huge goal for Sam and I to just be able to enter. And you know, we had spent so much time writing all these documents, and you know, we wrote the feature version before we started cutting, and then obviously it changed quite dramatically during the edit. And so for us, entering it into the AWGIEs was turning that original script we wrote into this kind of updated version of a postscript, basically, but still with all our kind of prose that we were using in the one that we wrote beforehand. And it was actually a really like kind of cathartic process for Sam and I, because it was, you know, as we mentioned, we've rewritten things so many different times, and to see kind of it in its final form, being like, this is the script, you know, like this is it, it's done, it's out in the world, this is kind of the final thing that we're going to write on Girl Like You. It was kind of quite emotional for us and really cathartic, because when we sent it off, we were just like, wow, that's the final kind of bit of writing that we're going to do on this. And yeah, so we our hopes on getting nominated were actually pretty low. We kind of didn't really expect it. And then we got nominated, which was for the documentary category. And we were just over the moon. I remember calling Sam out in the car park of work and just like screaming down the phone. So excited. And then we were kind of deciding whether to go to the AWGIEs or not, because it was in Sydney. And I kept getting emails and phone calls asking us if we were going to come. And I was like, oh, Sam, this is a really good sign. They want to know if we're going to come. We've got to go because we might win the documentary category. And so we flew over to Sydney and we went there, and we did win the documentary category. But then at the very end of the night, there was something called the Major Award that came up, which me and Sam did not know existed. We didn't know what it was. And, you know, we were both just kind of sat there watching, and then they announced the Major Award as us. And Sam and I both were in shock. Like we didn't even know what the award was. And I think, you know, for anyone who was there on the night, you can tell in our speeches because we just are just up there yelling and not knowing what to say. But it was an unreal moment. It was awesome.
Oh my God. And I remember thinking, even when we were, you know, the RSVP requests were coming through, you know, are you going to make it or not? I still remember saying to Frances, you know, I think they just want the nominee, you know, they want us all in the same room because it's the first time we're kind of getting together in the flesh post-COVID. So I was like, oh, you know, don't get your hope, like we can't get our hopes up. And we were just so shocked and so grateful. And we'd met a lot of people there that we'd never met before. And we were kind of in our little spot, you know, in the crowd, sitting with our people that we'd made friends with at this event. And it was just a really lovely experience. I feel like everybody was just so happy for each other. And yeah, it just felt, it was so nice to be just recognised in that room of writers. And I knew that it had been something that Frances had, you know, she always said it was kind of the pinnacle of the awards that we could get. So it was amazing.
Now, I remember being so like excited for you guys afterwards. You just had this massive smile on your faces when you came out, and I had to like message everyone at home saying like, with WA, like did the major award. But tell us again, like, so winning that major award, what does that lead on to for you guys? Is that how the Netflix thing started, or?
Yeah, so I mean, it was so, we actually had to Google it when we walked out. We were like, and I was texting my sister, I was like, what's the major award? We just won it. And she told us what it was, and me and Sam were just blown away. Like we just never, because I feel like documentary writing is often kind of not given as much respect as drama writing. You know, they're two very different beasts, but we just kind of, we never assumed in a million years that we would be able to win that major award. So it meant so much to us, especially for the first feature that we've kind of written. And me and Sam kind of hold writers in the highest regard, and we've always just wanted to be kind of recognised as writers. So on a personal level, it's just amazing to kind of have that recognition of like, okay, I am a writer, like, you know. But on a more kind of logistical level, basically we woke up the next day, and ABC was currently holding the international sales rights to Girl Like You, and we're trying to find an international sales person to buy it. And the next morning after the AWGIEs, Netflix emailed our representative at ABC and said, congratulations on the AWGIE Award, can we talk? And so then they had a meeting, and they basically acquired Girl Like You to be on Netflix for 2 years. So we don't know for sure, but we're pretty sure that the AWGIEs resulted in our film being acquired by Netflix.
And we should sort of point out that the major award doesn't guarantee anyone.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. Disclaimer. Do you want to, like, Sam, do you want to explain what the major award is and what it means to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, most outstanding script of the year across all categories, which Frances and I were blown away by, because there were so many fantastic winners that night. And it felt really diverse in that room as well, documentary and animation and, you know, comedy and all these amazing genres and, you know, big productions as well. So yeah, it felt really, really surreal, and it felt, you know, Frances and I were just blown away, because at the end of the day, it was a very, we were a really small crew on a pretty low budget documentary from Perth. And we all put our heart and souls into this documentary as well. Ellen Lauren especially, and then we're obviously really good friends with them, and all the crew and Elle and Lauren, we all became really close. So I feel like the award was just the perfect nod to this, you know, heart-filled little doc that we've, you know, blood, sweat and tears into. It was just amazing.
Well, the fact that you are so close to Elle and Lauren, I guess now that this documentary is out on a global stage, how do both Elle and Lauren and the other subjects sort of feel about their lives kind of being out there in public? And as documentary makers, what's the responsibility you have to kind of protect your subjects as much as possible?
Yeah, I feel like Frances and I, we grappled with this a lot throughout the process, because we were, you know, in our early 20s and friends with Lauren and Elle, and there were all these ethical questions that we were always juggling, especially because, you know, as you will see in the film, sometimes we would interview Elle in one room and she'd have her perspective, and we'd go to the next bedroom, and Lauren would have a completely different perspective. And it was this real ethical balance for us as friends. You know, where do we draw the line within these relationships? But I feel like Frances and I, we just kind of made it a priority to always keep the lines of, you know, communication really open with both of them, and just be really honest about what we wanted to include. And if they didn't want us to, if they had any kind of really big oppositions to a scene or anything that we'd shot, we'd take that into account. And for Frances and I remember we cut the first rough cut, and we asked them both to, you know, come over to our house and watch it. This is like, you know, a long time before it's ever going to hit any screen or be, you know, have any kind of premiere, just so they could, you know, get a sense of what's going to be out there and process their emotions, and we could kind of, you know, talk about it from there. So, I mean, that's what we did the entire way through, and I'm glad we did it. And I feel like now that it's out on Netflix, which is obviously kind of the largest platform it's been on, they're both really ready for it, even though I know that it has been really confronting for them, you know, even since the first premiere to now.
So I guess in terms of like the lessons learned through this process, like 6 years ago, you were shooting during a pandemic, you've kind of probably gone through different changes in technology, you now transcribe using AI. Like, what are the things that if you were doing this project today, how would you tackle it differently? Would you tackle it differently?
Oh gosh, yes.
I feel like Sam and I learned everything we know about documentary and storytelling from a girl like you, and like literally just having to learn on the fly how to do it. Like I think we just learned everything from it because we just had to do it. I think something we started learning about halfway through is that, you know, when we first started shooting, it was basically majority interviews. We would sit them down and just have like a talking head and just interview them. And as we sort of started filming and started getting deeper and deeper and putting things onto the timeline, we started watching everything back and going, okay, like the most interesting stuff we have is the observational footage of the camera just watching them doing stuff. And so we started to kind of pivot away from talking head interviews and just like shooting them doing things, you know, like, and watching them in their natural state. And for us, like, that was a huge learning curve for us and something that we kind of had to battle a bit in the edit, because the first few years was just like majority interviews. But, you know, I think that's something that we really learned and will continue to doing for the rest of our career, which is basically hugely prioritizing observational shooting, because, you know, it's amazing what seeing someone sit down and say something versus seeing it unfold in front of your eyes in a natural environment. It's like a completely different experience. And, you know, that's something that we will continue doing forever, I think. Yeah.
So in terms of there's a technical question which has come up in the chat here, just in terms of the cameras that you used when you're starting out. And you talk about kind of the observational documentary kind of portion of this. There are obviously, video vlogs, which are probably coming from, a camera in a computer. There's some iPhone stuff in there as well. Like, talk about, I guess, the process of finding, it's a mixed media form, but what primarily were you shooting on? And is that something like a camera or a type of setup that you're going to continue to use for the future project?
Yeah, the first couple of years with the Blackmagic camera, which was just beautiful, and that was a lot of I'm really grateful that we had that camera for some of the scenes, especially the live gig, because it's just the colors and just the way it kind of captures is beautiful. And then we moved on to a Canon, but like you said, it was mixed media the entire way through, and that was a huge, a big battle in the edit.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, like, for us, we kind of weren't in the position with no funding to choose a camera. So we kind of found a cinematographer we liked, and we used the camera that he had, because we weren't in a position to be like, no, we don't want that camera, we want this camera. So, that ended up being the Blackmagic, which is a beautiful camera. But then we changed cinematographers about halfway through, and he had a Canon. So it kind of wasn't a conscious decision at that time, because we just didn't have the kind of means to be able to choose what camera that we wanted. But, I think the good thing about it is me and Sam kind of figured out a way to ingratiate that into the story. So it's very mixed media. We've got like VHS, we've got Elle's Zoom diaries, a couple of different cameras. And we tried to really kind of ingratiate that into the way that we were telling the story as kind of messy patchwork of someone's life. So, like, we think it reflects the story of kind of a middle-class Australian people who are, struggling and doing things in a bit of a messy way. And we kind of wanted that to reflect in the edit, and then also in the kind of mixed media that we were using. So I don't think that we will do that for future unless the subject called for it. I mean, our next documentary is on a supercar driver who's also an OnlyFans star. So that's going to be a very, very different camera setup for us, and hopefully a step up from what we were using before. But, I think for me and Sam, the story is king. So, for us, it doesn't really matter too much, like how, as long as the story is working and the story is absorbing, that is the main kind of focus for me and Sam, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess you're both editors and you've both worked on other documentaries beyond this and obdocs. How important is sound for you guys, like on capturing everything, especially if you don't get it on camera, just being able to record that sound bite? How important it is for other documentarians to at least record something audio-wise in the background constantly?
Oh, it's so important. We actually had Elle keep a like an audio diary throughout the process as well, and a lot of that is used throughout. So sometimes we've got a lot of her kind of voiceover, which is carrying us through, and her narration, and a lot of that is just her with a Zoom recorder talking about how she's feeling in that moment. So I would say audio is super important. You can always find a creative way to cover that audio. That's kind of the beauty in documentary as well, is just kind of finding the creativity to cover, to tell the story as well, which is really fun.
Well, let's talk about moving on from this one project onto your next project. At what stage in making Girl Like You does this next subject come up for you? Are you working on both at the same time, or was it very much like, we've completed one, we're absolutely done, here's another project that we'd love to jump onto?
Yeah, so Cody was really encouraging us all the way through post-production of Girl Like You to be like, come on, we need a new idea, we need a new thing, we got to like start getting it up, because obviously it takes so long to get a next documentary up. And me and Sam just kind of didn't have the brain capacity to be able to do it, because we were so just in the Girl Like You world, and we were like, Girl Like You is going to be forever, we can't think about the next thing. And so we finished Girl Like You, and then I think about 6 months afterwards, or maybe even less, I can't even remember, we started looking for a new idea. And, that idea came about because I had been following this Australia's first female supercar driver for many, many years. And she basically got pushed out of supercars due to sexism, and then turned around and started an OnlyFans and is now Australia's #1 content creator on OnlyFans. And so it was a story that I was very across in the media. And I had been talking to Sam about it a lot, and me and Sam kind of thought that that was going to be a really interesting story to tell. So we started kind of writing a pitch document to convince Cody of the idea. We wanted to bring her a really strong idea that she would immediately get behind, because once Cody's behind something, it's like, it's off for the races. So we were like, we got to get this together in a way that Cody's going to love. So me and Sam kind of did a lot of research and wrote like a very basic pitch document, and then presented it to Cody. And I think she replied just saying, I'm in. And then she contacted Renee Gracie, who's the supercar driver, and we set up a meeting, and yeah, it all just kind of started from there.
And this pitch document is created before you've shot a second of footage, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what does it involve again? Is it the log line, the kind of synopsis, kind of the pitch? Is it full of images? How would you kind of, if you were giving advice to people who want to jump into a subject matter, what does that sort of pitch document like look and feel like?
So me and Sam love doing this thing where you make, even if because sometimes applications, they'll ban you from putting pictures in there. Me and Sam love doing like a cover page, which is basically just the most exciting images that you can possibly find on this subject. And you see those images before any of the writing. So you kind of get them in your head. And so we always do that. And then, because this was a kind of a pretty brief pitch to Cody, it was quite informal. Basically, we had a log line, and then we had about 3 paragraphs. The first being like, this is the story. The second being like, this is kind of why we're interested in the story. And then the third paragraph being the themes that we kind of want to explore through this story. So it was pretty basic stuff, but I mean, we also included a few YouTube videos, I think at the time, because she was vlogging, because a really big aspect of documentary is obviously your talent needs to be quite enigmatic and be good at talking on camera and be someone who you kind of want to listen to, because it's all well and good if someone has a good story, but then that they're on camera and they talk like this, it's very hard to like connect to that person. So we also included a couple of interviews that she'd done with supercars, and then one on her OnlyFans, to be like, look how entertaining she is, look how beautiful she is, and like how smart she is, and like, we kind of felt like she was a character that could hold a 90-minute film on her back. So yeah, that was the very brief early pitch.
And this is going to be a 90-minute documentary that's going to live on Stan, is that right?
Yeah.
And when do you expect it to when can people expect to see this documentary?
So we start shooting in a couple of months, and I think it'll be done and dusted and hopefully on Stan by early 2024.
Right, that's fantastic, guys. And it's amazing to jump like from that first kind of documentary that was like a 6-part web series thing into a 1-hour sort of TV that was a feature, and then back to like this 1 hour, and now you're kind of like back to this great feature length. Like he's on another great Australian streaming service. So congratulations, guys.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
It's
We're so excited to kind of do it all in 1 year. That's
not spend 6 years. That's
yeah, we kind of can't wrap our heads around it. Just being able to kind of spit this project out in a year.
Yeah, and even just the process of getting it funded couldn't have been more opposite to Girl Like You, and I think that was because throughout Girl Like You, we kind of established that we were kind of filmmakers who could make a feature and were kind of reliable to do it. And so we kind of had that credit under our belt. So getting this feature funded was, the first one took us 5 years, and I think this one was fully funded in about 4 months from when we sent that pitch to Cody. So it's a very, very different scenario than we were in 6 years ago.
Well, thanks so much, guys. If anyone else has any other questions, put them into the Q&A, and I'll just go through a few of these now. So Kit asks, in terms of documenting an unfolding story, how do you write dialogue for scenes that haven't emerged yet, or do you?
That's a really good question. I was just looking at that before. Francis and I were just kind of discussing this the other day, I think, at work, and how kind of clueless we were to the whole process when we first started Girl Like You, and we couldn't wrap our heads around how do we make this treatment? How do we write a story treatment when we have no idea where this is going? And really, it doesn't seem like it should be this simple, but it is. You just have to envisage it. So you just need to think, you've done a lot of research on the subjects. You're within the story. Where do you see it going? So that's what Francis and I did. And originally, when we did get into the factory pitch at AIDC, we had a happy ending for Lauren and Elle written, and that was kind of our hero's ending, and we were so attached to it, where they stay together, they get engaged, they get married, and we were just so attached to this happy ending. We'd written it, and we just thought it was beautiful. And the reality is, in the documentary space, is that real life is unfolding and things don't always go the way that you plan, but you do plan and you do write these scenes as if they are the scenes that's going to unfold.
And what I always think is, like, the way we did it is, like, think about the best version that your story would be. Like, if you could plan everything, what is the best version of what it could be to the things that you want to talk to the story that you want to tell? Write that version and make up dialogue, make up everything based in reality of what the research you've done and the subjects that but try and write what you think would be the best version of this story, because then once you start shooting, you'll be aiming for that best version, and obviously it'll go off in many different directions, but I think that's a good place to start.
But you also captured that beautiful bit of audio where it's like 7% of relationships, like after transitioning, remain together. So there's a 93% chance of them failing. So either way, if you get this fairy tale ending, you've achieved something. If you haven't, you've also kind of like proven that these things are very difficult, and we can explore that, which is really beautiful and very sensibly handled as well. In terms of, so there's a question here from Peter. How difficult was it to accommodate a change from a 3-act structure to a 6-part series, and what challenges did that present?
So basically, it's really funny in the way that we wrote it as a feature following the 3-act structure, and then we broke the episodes. So we had 6 episodes, and we basically cut. So episode 1 was act 1, episode 2 and 3 was act 2, and then 2, 3, 4 were the second act, and then 5 and 6 were act 3. So we kind of didn't stray from the 3-act structure, even when we had 6 episodes. But the challenge there was that we had to kind of make sure that while we were telling that 3-act structure, in each one, they kind of had to have their own individual 3-act structure, which also kind of raised a problem and then solved it and then left you on a cliffhanger. So it was very difficult to do. But what I think it worked in the way that we did it, and the influence that it had on the feature, which I think is fantastic, is that you kind of feel like it's never resolving. Like it's always piling on top of each other in a way that, we go up and then something's solved and then a new issue is raised. And I think it actually worked really well for the kind of feature format, because it means that we're never kind of sitting down. We're always moving onto larger and larger problems. So yeah, all 3 of the films follow the 3-act structure, but just in slightly different ways.
Okay. Well, look, I've read the script and I think it's a beautiful document, and it's amazing on the page, but it's so rare to read Australian screenplays, and it's almost rarer to read Australian documentary screenplays. is there ever a chance that, and this is to Lark's question, is there ever a chance that you guys will share this script or make the script of this show public now that it's out on Netflix and we're seeing more, for your consideration, scripts that we can read right now? Will this documentary script ever make it online to be read someday?
Oh yeah, take it. We
Love
would
that.
love everyone to read it.
Who wants it?
I don't know how that works, but
Yeah, I mean, we could always make it available on our website, and you know, just make it available in a PDF version. If writers are interested, we can send it personally. You know, if there's any kind of AWGIE Guild members who do want to read it, we're more than happy to share.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
we
definitely
can send
2
it to
writers there
AWG.
that would read it for sure.
Yeah. Can we send it to the AWG, Aaron, and they can?
You can absolutely host it online, I believe.
Yeah, we'll host it on our website and then maybe we can
then send us a link and we'll absolutely promote it out there, because the more screenplays that writers can read, the better chance they get to write, for sure. Is there any other questions from our audience to these 2 amazing WA filmmakers? No, well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you very much to Samantha Marlowe and Francis Elliott. Please do check out their documentary Girl Like You, which is on Netflix right now. Is it also on iView for those who don't have Netflix?
No, it's not on iView anymore, just Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just on Netflix right now, guys. So please do check that out, and do stick around next year to watch their new documentary, Coming to Stan. Hopefully it'll be that same title, but you never know. Titles change all the time. So thank you very much. This is a thank you from Danielle. Another thank you from Peter and Suna. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
for having
Thanks,
us.
Thanks,
Aaron.
Aaron. See
See you
ya.
guys around.
Bye.
Bye.